E agora sim, é de face de deputado federal, representante da oposição na área financeira. Esteve em conferência virtual com os média étnicos canadianos para falar sobre o lançamento do budget de 2021 do governo dos liberais. O Correio da Manhã Canadá marcou presença e teve a oportunidade de falar diretamente com o deputado conservador. Ora, veja.
Obviously, I had to respond to the budget speech that Minister Chrystia Freeland gave in the House of Commons. I can tell you it's a long document, the budget. It's over 700 pages. In fact, there it is right here, 700 pages that I had to read through. And I can tell you the news is troubling, and I'll tell you why. This budget is the largest spending budget in Canadian history, bar none. It creates the largest deficit in our history, the largest debt. In fact, our national debt is projected to go to 1.4 trillion, and in 3 to 4 years, it's expected to hit $1.83 trillion, almost $2 trillion. So tripling basically since 2015. Now, what that should mean to all of you is we have a massive financial challenge that we've been left with. The pandemic crisis has caused governments of all sorts across the country to support Canadians in their time of need. And I'll be the first to say that we, as the opposition, and certainly the Trudeau government, and all of us opposition parties, we have to stand in the gap for Canadians who have fallen through the cracks, who've been left behind, who are struggling to make it to the end of the pandemic. And what I was hoping to see in this budget was some hope and confidence that we could give to future generations of Canadians that they were still going to have a prosperous future, that there was a light at the end of the tunnel. They could still live out the Canadian dream. And this budget doesn't achieve that at all. What it does, it heaps more and more debt on future generations of Canadians and doesn't even have a debt management strategy under which we at least would have some clear guidelines and guardrails that would guide us as we try to come to grips with this massive debt. So that is the story of this big budget. Of course, there's been money sprayed all over the place. And on a short-term basis, I can confirm there is clear support for Canadians as they try to make it through the COVID pandemic. And we support many of those programs. I want to be very clear about that. But there's a lot of ambiguity about the finance minister's ability to understand how big this debt is that we as Canadians have now taken on. And there's no strategy to deal with it. There is no idea of how we're going to address spending in the future. No fiscal anchors which would provide us with the rules that would allow us to manage the debt wisely. So that's the story of this budget. I can certainly get into other elements of it. This budget, by the way, has no plan to reopen our economy safely. This budget really has no plan to get people back to work. It does support them right now as they're struggling to make ends meet, but it's not addressing the 500,000 Canadians that are still without jobs. And so it's a real disappointment for me. I thought we could do better as a country. But you know, you may have a different perspective on this. You may like all this massive spending and the fact that we're going to run interminable deficits and that we have a government that really has accepted they will never, ever go back to balance again, not even in the long term. They have no goal like that in this budget. So I'd be glad to hear your questions. I'll do my best to answer them. I don't know all of the answers, but I'll do my very best.
Good evening, Minister Fass and everyone joining the panel. My name is Teresa Santos and I'm from Correio da Manhã Canadá. So small businesses are the strength of the Canadian Portuguese community. So in light of the 2021 budget, federal budget, what efforts will be made to secure investments in these small businesses? Thank you.
Well, the best investment we can make, Teresa, is to reopen the economy safely. By the way, the budget has no plan to safely reopen the economy. The best thing we could do is find a way of reopening the economy, allowing those businesses to do what they do best, which is create jobs, generate economic growth. Right now, we can't give Canadians the hope that that will happen because the budget doesn't set out the parameters under which that would happen. The other thing I would note, again, I mentioned those key investments in our economy, key infrastructure, making sure that we have childcare sufficient to support families and women who want to enter the workforce and backfill the baby boomers who are now leaving the workforce and retiring. That's important because it will in itself generate growth. We have to get businesses, small businesses, back on their feet. Now, by the way, there are some short-term measures in this budget, to be fair, that do assist small businesses. There's extensions of the CEWS program and the rent subsidy program. There's a little bit of tinkering around the edges of another few programs. But in fact, at the end of the day, businesses are going to need to have an economy where they can open fully and provide the services and sell the products that make them successful. In closing, I would just say, despite all of the challenges we face as a country, we talked about the housing crisis, we have a healthcare challenge in Canada, mental health, we've got childcare needs that have to be addressed. We have this massive national debt. We have deficits right now that are sort of out of control. Despite all of that, we still live in the best country in the world. I'm still very bullish on our country. We have a diverse country. We have a peaceful country. I wouldn't trade it for any in the world, any in the world. And I've traveled probably as much as any member of parliament has. As former trade minister, I visited all the major capitals around the world, met with many of the world leaders that are still around. And you know what? I come back home and I'm so grateful we live in Canada. So let's put our problems in perspective. Yes, some of these problems are acute and they need to be addressed. But let's still be very positive about our country that's given us so many opportunities. I want to make sure that my children, my grandchildren, I've got 11 of them now, that they actually can still live the Canadian dream, which is second to none around the world. We have the best opportunities here. So I encourage all of you who are engaged in media, in ethnic media, thanks for communicating, for being the sounding board of Canadians across the country, for actually communicating what's happening across our country and allowing Canadians to make informed choices, because that's what it's all about. We live in a democracy, arguably the best democracy in the world, imperfect, but still the best. So all the best to all of you. Stay safe and God bless.